Hello, everyone. I would like to welcome you on behalf of CRDCN to the 10th webinar in our series with the Journal of Canadian Public Policy. I'll start by acknowledging that McMaster University, the host institution for CRDCN, is located on the traditional territories of the Mississauga and Haudenosaunee nations, and within the lands protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. We begin this session by giving honor and thanks to the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe nations and to recognize our responsibility as guests to respect and honor the intimate relationship Indigenous peoples have to this land. Today we are going to use the Q&A function for asking questions. We will take questions from each presenter directly following their presentation. To begin, Dr. Tammy Sherrill, CPP editor, will welcome our speakers.
Okay, welcome everyone to this webinar. Thank you, Tess, and everyone at CRDCN for bringing us all together. I'm here today in sunny Waterloo, Ontario, at Wilfrid Laurier University, which is, of course, the traditional territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. I'm here hosting this webinar today because I'm also the current editor at Canadian Public Policy, and this is a great opportunity to showcase some of the research that we've been able to publish. So thank everyone who has contributed to the journal, our authors who are submitting amazing Canadian work, the co-editors, and especially reviewers that offer their time and effort to help us produce much better research for our Canadian public. Now for this webinar, I would encourage again everyone to leave questions in that Q&A feature. I hope we're going to have a few minutes at least towards the end of each talk for a bit of conversation. Now first up we have Jiang Li presenting her paper with Huju Liu. The paper is titled The Role of Complementary Capabilities in AI Adoption and Productivity, Firm Level Evidence from Canada. It's a bit of a mouthful, but we'll get there. I'll point out that this paper is coming out very soon as part of a special issue with CPP. It's titled Artificial Intelligence Safety and Public Policy in Canada. We're really just finishing up some details, and I'm actually hoping it will be out sometime next week. That issue was sponsored by the Canadian Institute for Advanced Research and the University of Waterloo's Cybersecurity and Privacy Institute. And so that allows us to make that public access, open access when that arrives next week. So I encourage you to check it out. But for now, I will turn everything over to you, Beryl. Please go ahead.
Thanks very much. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, excellent. We were having some audio issues, and if you could let me know or give me a thumb up, if you can see my screen, that would be great.
Yep.
Perfect. All right, let's get this started. Thank you very much for the invitation, both from Tess and Tammy. I think this is a great opportunity to showcase some of the work that we've been doing from the government of Canada. Of course, the standard caveat applies that anything that expressed herein are those of the authors between myself and Huju, and do not represent in any way Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada, Statistics Canada, or Government of Canada. So let's dive right in. Right, this is no surprise to anyone. I think artificial intelligence, or AI, is among the fastest growing technologies being adopted in Canada, right? 77% from this chart, from Survey of Advanced Technology, and the survey in 2022 captures about 77% of adopters started just in the previous 3 years. Firms adopting or planning to adopt AI are substantially more innovative. Specifically, AI users have the incidence rates of innovation about twice of non-users and almost thrice of those for those product innovations. This innovations also benefits not only related to AI, right? Business adopting multiple advanced technologies such as big data analytics or robotics report even higher rate of adoption of innovation. Excuse. I think this is a bit of very challenging time, given that we have, as a country, have faced persistent productivity challenges over the past couple of decades, and largely due to, as many have documented, weak business innovation investment, and that contributed to also the underinvestment in those productivity enhancing assets, whether it's tangible, such as R&D, machinery equipment, to intangible, such as software and data. And we know that the current adoption pattern yields a very concentrated, uneven distribution, which will also most translate to the gains in down the road, right? That's likely going to be concentrated in knowledge-intensive sectors and where there is existing digital capacity and absorptive capacity, larger businesses, particularly those are readily their sectoral productivity leaders, as well as tech centers such as Vancouver, Montreal, Toronto, where those research capacities, right, research centers, research universities tend to locate. Now, the economic-wide benefit from AI adoption has been estimated to be fairly small and can take decades, if not more, to realize across advanced economies, right? So the very famous productivity J-curve hypothesis suggests that initial investment yields little immediate gains as adjustment, complementary investments, and organizational change are required. And in Canada in particular, there has not been any conclusive evidence of a broad-based short-term productivity growth from AI, but of course projections suggest significant long-term benefits if complementary investments are made. Right, so at this juncture, I think it's very important for us to have a better understanding of how recent AI adoption impacts business performance, in terms of guiding public policies that can help promote innovation and foster sustainable economic growth. So in this paper, Huju and I asked two main questions, right? What type of firms, what kind of business actually are more likely to adopt AI? And of course, the adjacent question is, what is the impact of such adoption on the productivity performance and its growth? Right? And relatedly, and probably more specifically, does such impact differentiate, right, across businesses? I'll walk you through some of the parts we've covered in terms of the data and walk you through some of the empirical framework and share the findings from this work, and I will provide some concluding remarks at the end. As you might have been familiar with some of the Statistics Canada's business survey data that focuses on business innovation, strategy, and digital adoption, right? So specifically, this study uses linked business microdata between linking the survey of digital technology and internet use, SDTIU, across 3 waves between 2019, 2021, to 2023. And of course, the survey itself is very comprehensive. What we managed to capture or extract from this data source is the binary adoption, right? So whether you are an adopter or not, and if you are, there are additional further questions diving into like what type, what's your purpose of the use, and what are some of the obstacles that you face in such adoption, right? It also includes some of the capacities, whether complementary or substituting, including cloud computing, big data analytics, advanced robotics, ICT and training, and specialist. Now, linking this survey data to the business microdata foundation is one of the, I would say, advantages of our study, because that allowed us, using the Business Universe National Accounts Longitudinal Microdata file, NALF, between 2011 to 2023, allowed us to back out some of the characteristics of businesses at a micro level, right? That includes size, age, industries, but also performances such as labor productivity, its growth, capital intensity, R&D, foreign ownership, as well as their international activities, trade activities such as export imports. So I will flag here, while we use the 2023 survey for some summary statistics and charts in the study, our regressional analysis uses only the first 2 waves. That is, it ends in 2021. And why we do so is due to the sampling differences. In the 2023 wave, we introduced a very small businesses, so fewer than 5 employees. That said, the 2023 wave shows broadly consistent descriptives. So, but for the subsequent analysis, we'll be focusing on the 2019 and 2021 survey, with the exception of some statistics. All right. This is not extremely fancy modeling, right? Because some of the constraints that we face with using microdata in particularly in the linked environment, right? So for the first part of the question that we look at which firm tend to adopt more, right, in AI, and we use a probing model where we control for a series of firm level characteristics, their complementarity investments, but we also, to mitigate the potential selection bias, where we know that more productive firms are more likely to adopt AI, we include firms' initial labor productivity in 2011 as an additional control. And this timing is actually very relevant because the past studies in the literature have pointed out AI technologies such as deep learning, artificial neural networks began gaining traction since 2012. So we need to anchor it around before adoption kind of productive performance in order to reduce that kind of reverse causality. Now, on the second part of the question, we use OS estimation. And again, here we use 2 waves of the survey linked to the business universe, where we analyze what is the impact of AI on labor productivity. So the left-hand side variable in equation 2 indicates productivity as well as its growth, whereas the adoption is a binary, whether you adopt or not, right? For robustness checks, we also bring this estimation into a diff design, with of course considering the time frame is relatively short, we essentially identify the treatment group as those that did not adopt in 2019 but did so in 2021, and of course the control group is the alternative in 2021 still continue to be a non-adopter. And we also imputed the panel structure as weight in order to make it more of a longitudinal structure. Now with that, let's dive into some empirical statistics, right? So the first chart, we look through the AI adoption by industry. Compared with goods producing sectors, service providing sectors are more likely to adopt, right? Top adopters have persistently concentrated in information and culture industries, followed by professional, scientific, and technological services as a distant second. AI adoption rate, as you compare across the years, has generally increased, right? Accelerating among the early adopters, right? Early and top adopters in services, but also steadily among goods sectors such as manufacturing. The only exception where we don't see that kind of general growth is in mining, oil and gas, and utility, which there is actually a steady decline. In 2019, it's only about less than 4%, but in 2023, it's even less than probably 1%. Okay. Turning to the uptake by firm size, large firms naturally are more with more observability capacity and digital assets. They tend to be in the early adopters, and they are persistently also more likely to adopt across time. In 2023, for example, about 27% of large businesses, that is with 250 or more employees, they adopt AI, followed by about 24% median size enterprises, so those with employment between 100 to 249, and only 17% of smaller firms, those with employee less than 100. The rate of adoption has also increased over this 4-year time period, regardless of the size class. In particular, if we're looking at the small firms, they actually saw an accelerated growth in adoption by 32% annually between the first 2-year period and further to 35% for the latter 2 period. Now, in contrast, the smaller ones, namely medium firms, actually medium large firms, witness a deceleration in their adoption. So, for example, large firms saw a growth of only 20% annually for the first 2-year period, and then only 5% afterwards. So there is a decline in their growth among medium and large enterprises. And the final chart for uptake by age group, younger firms. So those are, less than 10 years old are more likely than older firms to adopt AI. And specifically the youngest group, less than 5 years old, right? So the share of them adopting AI reached about 7% in 2023 compared to only about 5% among the older businesses that 21 years or older. While the rise of AI adoption is broad-based across all the age classes, firm aged less than 5 years old or older than 21 years old, they actually experience an accelerated growth in adoption. Among younger firms, for example, the annual growth was about 12%, excuse me, for the first two periods compared to about 36% for the latter two. This is in stark contrast to the firms that age between, so the two groups in the middle, which have faced a slowdown in growth. Finally, let's pull this piece together. So you can see in table 1 here is a bit a lot of detail, so I will try to walk you through as much as possible. But let's just first focus on the two columns that says all, right, and the non-AI adopters. So AI adopters, the first column of AI adopters versus the non-AI adopters, the first and last column. AI adopting firms tend to be more productive than non-adopters, as one would expect, but it's also showing a very clear productivity advantage even before adopting AI, right? Likely because more productive firms, they choose and they self-select into adopting new technologies. Now, after adopting AI, these firms do not see a faster productivity growth compared to the non-users. In fact, their growth rates are slightly lower in comparison, though this difference isn't statistically significant. AI adopting firms pays substantially higher average wages, but lower capital intensity. So this is reflecting some of the concentration we noted earlier in service industries rather than capital-heavy goods industries. Right? These firms are also more international. They are more likely to be foreign-owned and to engage in trade, both exports and imports. Turning to size, AI adopters are much larger on average, right? 97, I believe. 187 compared to 27. It's a huge difference. And a higher portion of them are actually medium and large sized. While AI adopters tend to be younger, this difference is not statistically significant. Now, going through the last portion of the segment, complementary capacity, AI adopters shows a much greater likelihood of conducting R&D, and they frequently adopt other advanced technologies. So the AI adoption does not exist in a vacuum. Over 90% of the adopters, AI adopters also use cloud computing, while 1/3 use data analytics, and 4% employ robotics. 1 in 3 of them also provide ICT training, indicating broader investment in technology skills. Now, turning to the columns in between, so under the AI adopter, but focusing on the 4 columns from R&D to robotics. Right? These are where adopters basically also engage in other activities. AI using firms differ considerably, especially when also adopting R&D or robotics. Combining with R&D is showing higher productivity, while pairing AI with robotics actually lead to lower productivity growth, but higher wages, right? This might reflect in parts industrial concentration of specific adopters. Now, firms using AI with advanced technologies like robotics and R&D are actually far more international and tend to be much larger. So with this, I'm gonna see, I can turn to the empirical studies. So here, the first question we ask, which firms adopt, right? In this table, we distinguish adopters from any year, right? So this is at least one of the 2 survey years from those reported adoption in both waves. So let's first look at any year column. There's no significant correlation between a firm's AI adoption and its labor productivity. This might suggest that the relationship between the two is indirect, right, with AI uptake dependent on a broader set of digital capabilities rather than AI adoption alone. Looking at size, there is a U-shape relationship, But when we calculate the implied minimal size, it's actually approximately 3 employees, which is well under our 5-employee threshold in our sample. And the linear term is statistically insignificant. I think this essentially helps us ascertain that the likelihood of AI adoption increases steadily with firm size, which is to say that unless you have sufficient resources to scale AI adoption, it's unlikely for you to truly benefit from it, right? Or do it more effectively. In terms of age, it's an inverted U shape consistent with the diminishing marginal propensity to adopt as firms age. But the pivotal age is 8th year as we calculate it in translate that into the age. Effective is to say only when firms their scale and digital capability are well established is when they can actually see that benefit, and not necessarily just favoring sort of like the younger startups. International trade involvement does not necessarily lead to greater uptake. When we look through the complementary capabilities, firms most likely to adopt are those with these capabilities, right? For example, those investing in R&D, cloud computing, big data analytics, and so forth. Industry-wise, compared to manufacturing, service industries, especially earlier we mentioned information culture, fire, so forth, they are more likely to adopt. Now, turning to the both year column, we don't see a lot actions, right? And we also noted that the within group R square is only about 0.4, whereas the between is about 0.24. So this gives us the sense that the most variation probably likely driven by the difference across firms rather than the changes over time within the firms. Now, the last part of the results, we try to link the productivity with AI adoption, right? So if we first focus on the first 3 columns, that just looks like at the level of labor productivity performance, we translate this coefficient into marginal impact. What this translates into is basically to say labor productivity premium raw if we don't control the standard control, but not the initial the pre-adoption productivity or the complementary capabilities. We're looking at roughly about 17%. But once we control it, it drops to about 10%. And then when we further control for the complementary capability, it drops to about 5%, right? And it's becoming statistically insignificant. What this means is essentially higher productivity in AI adopting and is probably reflecting the broader focus on innovation and digital transformation and not just AI. Now, to better understand which factors most strongly complement in this paper, we also exclude these complementary capabilities one by one. What we really stood out for us was when we excluded cloud computing, the AI coefficient all of a sudden jumped to positive and statistically significant. What this means is cloud computing might be one of the most critical component enabling AI's productive enhancing properties by providing those necessary infrastructure to scale and deploy AI solutions effectively. And looking at growth aspect, I might be running a bit short on time. I would just simply say that we don't actually see a lot, right? This insignificant is also not driven by the inclusion of complementary properties, right? It might actually reflect the nature of AI use. So in one of the studies that we're currently undertaking, looking at businesses that not adopting, but innovating, patenting AI, right? Producing AI patents, we actually noted a significant and positive linkages between the AI patenters versus their productivities. All this to say is, I think it might have something to do with the nature of AI use, similar to some of the exercise had done using firm level data in France. The use of advanced robotics is negative, right? Correlated with labor productivity growth, and it's more pronounced over 2 years. One last point I want to bring to your attention is perhaps providing ICT training to employees shows a small but positive relationship within the 1 year productive growth, which is to say there might be, digital upscaling might yield more immediate benefits. Now, in the interest of time, I'm going to skip the D&D and diff and diff results just to say that the findings don't vary all that much. And here, similarly, the difference are not, while we're looking through the different subgroups, the difference are not statistically significant. I think this really underpins the variation in sample composition, national context, measurement approaches, timing, and of course, the nature of AI adoptions. So let me just quickly wrap up. If there's one key messages I would like you to take away, today's audience to take home, it is this. AI adoptions in isolation is insufficient to drive productivity. I think the ecosystem itself, right, including research, R&D, digital, and skill investment is what will ultimately unlock AI's transformative potential. I will stop here.
Wonderful. Thank you, Beryl. I will say if anybody in the audience out there does have a question, you can certainly plop that into that Q&A window there. But perhaps we'll wait to see if anyone has any questions. I'll ask you something. I
Of
appreciate
course.
this key message coming out of this paper as someone who has been a little grumpy every morning, shutting down certain features that seem to interfere with productivity on much of the software. So I'm wondering if maybe you could speak a little bit more to that sense that there's some firms who are adopting but not really integrating that technology in a productive way. That ICT training might be part of why I'm just grumpy and shutting things down, or can we differentiate that? And maybe just get it, what kind of data do we need to be able to pick that apart a bit more?
No, absolutely, Tammy. I really appreciate that question. I think this comes out more often than you think, right? I think lots of businesses think that, oh, first of all, they're very busy, right? Business owner, particularly small, medium-sized enterprises, which makes vast majority of the Canadian business universe, they're busy with day-to-day. How do you all of a sudden, let's try to integrate AI into your workflow, right? Similar, I think it's effectively echo you and I, right? Our day is busy. How do we best integrate a tool that we have yet to really figure out its use and how to use it, right? Without zero training. I think that's clearly an entry point that we need to make sure that businesses are fully aware. Plug and play can only go so far, right? The real benefit really will take time, and it will come after the business has already modified their workflow. They're producing different, they're co-experimenting, co-creating value with the tool, right? So think about you and I using ChatGPT as a question, maybe help us, draft a more diplomatic argument, right? So that we don't come across very grumpy. But that has not changed our workflow, right? Our workflow remains the same, right? So I think to your point in terms of how we can capture some of the changes in data, and I think that's precisely the direction that Huju and I have been thinking about, right? One aspect is to look at intensity. How often does business use it, right? Does your business actually have a policy in place to essentially, if this is a bit employer-led, business-led initiative versus, your corporation is asking your employees to integrate Copilot, all the while that every employee is using ChatGPT, right? How do we agree, right? So I think there are facets of things that we can currently exploit within the existing databases, such as STDIU that we used and the SIPs. But again, these are sort of more a bit of dated. It precedes, the bloom of ChatGPT era, right? This ends. But I would say one very promising direction that is undertaken by Statistics Canada, and Huju probably can speak more to that, is the announcement of TechStat. This is comprehensive technology measurement framework within StatsCan that was announced in the budget 2025 last November that incorporate essentially a number of surveys encompassing, adoption, various business surveys, as well as LFS to track employee adoption, right, extent of adoption, and social and governmental trust, public trust of AI usage. I think it's still, it's still in the development stage, and we know this type of data takes time to collect, to produce, and to eventually come online. And so as the data become mature, I'm sure there are things that we can look into while using the existing data. That's not to say we should not start to think, how can we map out the future of research, leveraging the new tools will become online.
Okay. So I did notice there's a few questions there about just the nature of the data and what we're going to be able to tease out of it. It is, only going up to 2021 here for your main work, plus the 2023 for some of those descriptive statistics. Stuart is saying, thinking about AI adoption and its usefulness. There's going to be certain types of firms and industries that are more information driven, where it's going to be more useful, perhaps more task driven. It's not. In the interest of time, what I will do here is mention that this will be coming out in print in the next week or so. And so I'll encourage people to kind of dig into some of the details that you have there in the paper, but I'll let you have a final word on that.
No, that's a fair comment. I think this is precisely why we're trying to push forward with both the data development agenda while continue to deepen our understanding of the existing evidence, right? I think that's the best way we can move forward in order to better understand how the AI adoption and its benefit, and to ensure potentially there's going to be early adopters benefiting more, right? Just like any other technological wave. How can we ensure that kind of inclusive and equitable access to AI enabled opportunities? So I'll stop here. Thanks for
Wonderful.
the
Thank you, Beryl.
opportunity.
Thank you very much. So yeah, lots of great work there to do with that data, and the business data is always very interesting. I'm glad you get to work with that. Next up, we do have Marie Connolly coming in here to join us today. She's from the University de Quebec à Montréal. She is going to be presenting her paper co-authored with Catherine Haeck. Marie, you can go ahead and find your slides up at any time. Now, this paper was first presented as a CPP lecture at the Canadian Economics Association meetings in 2025. I had the pleasure of being there. It was a great presentation. And from there, they put in a lot more work getting this puzzle resolved, which is really fun to be able to put that into a title. So this is published in our March 2026 issue of Canadian Public Policy. I'll point out it is available with open access, so you can certainly find that paper if you like. The paper is titled The Great Mobility Puzzle Resolved. Again, I love that you got to resolve the puzzle, so I will turn that over to you, Marie, to tell us about the paper.
Okay, thanks. Can you see my slides full screen?
Yes, no
Okay,
problem.
we're good. Okay, so thank you, Tammy and Mike, who I think is in the audience, Mike Veal, for inviting Catherine and I last year at the CEA meetings to give the CPP lecture. And they're like, oh, you can, talk about, something that's of interest. And then we're like, okay, cool. And I have to say, like, preparing the lecture was relatively easy and fun. Writing the paper afterward took a lot more time, but it was equally fun because I really got to dig into a lot of literature that I'm not going to have time to really talk about today. Before I start, this is a CRDCN also lecture. So this analysis was done at the KICS, the Quebec Inter-University Center for Social Statistics. We use StatsCan data. The views are our own. So thank you, and thank you, Shirk and FRQ for funding. Okay, Tammy mentioned that this is an article that was just published less than a month ago, and it is free access, so go for it, read it. The reference is here. If you're here, you probably know how to find a CPP article, or you can always email me and I'll send you the link. So in this paper, what we do, point number one is we go through the history of the Intergenerational Income Database, the IID, and its associated literature, which was a part that I really enjoy doing because I've been working using those data for more than a decade now, and I know and really love that literature. And so a lot of it is from me, but by no means all of it. And so it was really fun for me to write that literature, that lit review, so to speak. But what we really do is we highlight what we're going to call the nonlinearity in the intergenerational income mobility, and we sort of find the source. And we explain, I put quotes here, like air quotes, because it's not really like a statistical test, but we totally find what can explain the pattern that we've been seeing over and over. As I mentioned, for more than a decade using this data, we've been seeing that pattern, and now we can find where it's coming from. And where it is coming from, I'll spoil the punch a little bit. Now we have access to a linkage between the IID and census data. So it allows us to get more information or get census information from our people in the IID. And what we see is that this nonlinearity that we observe is mainly coming from the very low income in adulthood of people who declare indigenous identity. So then the second part of the the last part of the paper, but the second part of the talk today, I'm going to review a little bit the evidence that we find on indigenous peoples in the IID. So today, no time to go through the history and the literature, because I would be spending basically all day. There's a lot of great papers. Go and read it. These are all like amazing contributions to the literature on social mobility, and it's all thanks to the IID. This is a plug for the data, but also for the great work that StatsCan's doing it, working on these data, developing the data, maintaining the data. So, go for it and read it. But I am going to spend today's short time that I have with you to go through the nonlinearity part and what we can find, what we can see on the indigenous peoples in the IID. So I'll show you that. Okay. Nonlinearities in, so I'm gonna somehow sorry, it's fine. I can't see the title of the slide because the Zoom bar is on top of it, but whatever. Don't want to mess it up. Okay, so nonlinearities in the intergenerational income mobility in Canada. What is it? When I'll show you the model in like a second, but basically in that literature, what we often try to do is to measure the relationship between income rank of parents and income rank of children. So we look at individuals when they're adults, we look at their income rank, so their position in income distribution, and we try to see to what extent this rank is explained by the rank of the income of their parents while they were growing up. The rank relationship in the US, I put a quote up from Chetty et al. 2014 paper, which really was a sort of a watershed moment in the literature and spawned a number of various studies after that. So Chetty et al. Writes, the conditional expectation of a child's rank given his parents' rank is now you're in front of it, so I really can't see. It's almost perfectly linear. I think it's written. All right, yeah, okay. So not quite perfectly, but almost perfectly linear. And in Canada, with joint work with Miles Korak and Catherine Haeck in 2019, there seems to be more pronounced nonlinearities at the bottom of the Canadian income distribution. The question here is, can we find the source? Before I show you what it looks like, I need to spend just a couple of slides talking to you about the data. So the IID, mentioned it earlier, the Intergenerational Income Database, it's available in StatsCan's RDCs. It covers individuals that are born between 1963 and their parents, 1963 and 1985. So those are the children. And we have information, annual tax files on these people and their parents. The annual tax files are available between 1978 and 2016. More quotes soon. I hope it's really soon. Around 6 million observations. What this provides very detailed individual level data on income and all its sources, its tax files. It does not have information on characteristics like education, immigration status, occupation, visible status, visible minority status and stuff. But now we can find, for at least some people in our data, some of that information by linking the IID data to the census. And what we can do is we link it to the 1996, 2001, 2006, 2011, which was National Household Survey, and 2016. So because that's not everybody, we are able to find about 40% of our IID children and parents in the census, so we can add that information. In most everything that you're going to see here, we're going to look at rank mobility. And so it's the relationship between the basic model is, as I say, where you explain R, the child income rank, by P, the parent income rank. So when is that income measure? We use total income. So sum of all sources of income. For parents, we take both parents, we add them up, and we do the average when the child is between the ages of 15 to 19 years old. For children, we look at their income once they're adults or youngish adults, 27 to 31, and we compute percentile ranks within childbirth years for both parents and children. And so then once you have that, you can run that basic regression model. It's very simple. You do OLS, and what you retrieve is it's basically you find the equation for whatever linear equation, and you find the slope B, which is the correlation between parental income rank and child income rank. Okay, what does it look like? It looks like something like this. In this, this is coming from our 2019 paper. The blue triangles is what Chetty et al. Found for the US, and the red squares is what we find using the IID. So this is looking at Canadians. In this type of graph, it's a bin scatter plot. So each rank in the parental income distribution for rank 1, 2, 3, and so on, we can plot the mean child income rank on the y-axis, and then you can run a regression to find the linear fit between those points. You can do it in the individual level data or in the bin data. You find the same the same slope coefficients. And what you can see is that the blue triangles are almost all along that line. So a linear model is quite a good fit, a good approximation for that relationship. It is less so for Canada. So this is what we mean by nonlinearity. We mean that below, say, the 20th percentile rank for parental income, you have a relationship that is not quite next to that regression line, and that is it's a steeper. It looks like a steeper relationship, and those dots are mostly below the regression line. We've been seeing this over and over in different versions of work that we've done using the Kane data. We always is it the scale thing? Is it what we do with the zeros? Where does that come from? I'm going to show you another graph coming from another work that we're doing. In this work, we look at the 1.5 generation, so kids that immigrated to Canada as children. We compare them to the second generation. And when doing this, we also look at the 3+ generation. And what you can see in this graph is if you're going to find some source for the nonlinearity, it is going to be within the 3+ generation. So the children who are born in Canada from parents that are also born in Canada, because when you look at the immigrants, whether they're second generation immigrants, so children of immigrants, but that were born in Canada, or those that were born outside of Canada, so those that orange or that blue relationship, then you don't see that nonlinearity. So what we do now is using the information that's coming from the census, we can identify who at any point in time, if we find you in multiple censuses or if just we find you in one census, has reported a indigenous identity looking at the information that's in the census. And so here what you see is everybody put together, all the cohorts pooled, so everybody in the IID, everybody. I'm going to need to change the scale of the y-axis. So this is the same graph, but I just need to go a little lower in the y-axis for reasons that will become clear in a couple of slides. So now I have this. And now I'm going to split those red squares by whether the respondents have reported, so the children have reported indigenous identity. And the blue diamonds that have appeared on the graph are those that are not indigenous, that do not report indigenous identity. And there you can see that relationship now looks a lot more linear, especially here at the bottom of the parental income distribution. When you add the indigenous, this is what the relationship looks like. So you can see a few things. You can see that those dots are below the blue series or the red series, meaning that for a given parental income rank, so the ranks are computed the same way. So 20th percentile income rank for the parents is the same whether you're indigenous, non-indigenous, but it means that for a family, for children who grew up in a family at the 20th percentile, they can expect a rank of about 35, whereas the non-indigenous can expect a rank that's more like maybe 47 or 48. Right, so that there's a translation down. Moreover, these dots here at the bottom of the parental income distribution much lower. So you can see that the nonlinearity is coming from that source. The other thing that we can do with this graph is to look at those series and weight by population. And what that does is that, well, if you only had the red squares, because by construction, there's 1% of the population in each of the parental percentile bins, then it doesn't change anything basically. When I do it for the non-indigenous, because they cover about 95% of the population in our sample, it doesn't really change the distribution either. But when you look at it for the indigenous, then you see a difference. So for the indigenous, their parents are much more concentrated at the bottom of the parental income distribution. Here, the size of those circles is proportional to, within that series, proportional to the number of observations in that bin. And so you can see that the children that report indigenous identity, their parents are much more likely to be concentrated in the bottom income ranks. So they grow up in households that are much lower down in the income distribution. Also conditional on being in those low income households, they also grow up to have very low income ranks. And so those two factors combined mean that when you put it all together, you put all the data together, you put those blue diamonds and those orange squares, orange circles together, and you get the red squares. Well, you get that sort of nonlinearity here at the bottom, which can now be explained. So this is our puzzle that's been resolved. So as a good researcher, we were quite excited when we saw this. We were like, wow, this is amazing for research. It is less amazing for what it means and what you actually do see on screen, which are much lower income ranks for a certain group of the population, which are the indigenous. So what we then try to do is to say, okay, well, why do we see what we see? Can we put what we see in context? Do we see the same thing elsewhere? So this is the first thing that we did. So we can compare to the numbers are not exactly comparable here, but we do see what we can find with looking at US data. So the US source of the data is from Opportunity Insights, the Raj Chetty's group. And here it's a little different. So it's not indigenous, non-indigenous. It's the blue triangles are for white Americans, and the orange circles are for the AIANs in the US. So that's a census designation to say American Indian and Alaska Natives. And you see the same sort of level shift that is even conditional on the same parental income rank. The income rank of children of American Indians are much lower down. So that this shift, but what you don't see is that pronounced nonlinearity here at the bottom that we do see in Canada. So there seems to be something that is perhaps specific to Canada in that relationship, and that I think we still need to understand better. What I'm going to spend the next about 10 minutes, including questions for the rest. So those are short talks. I'm going to show you what we do know about Indigenous peoples in the IID. I need to give a little bit of context. I am not really going to go into literature because I really don't have time. This is in the so that's a plug. You can read the paper. You can read the paper in CPP. There's some reviews by Don Fair, including work that was published in the CPP. But what I'm going to show you is what we can find. A few other descriptive statistics or descriptive evidence that we are able to put together using the IID. And where we're trying to go with this is to try to understand, we're at the very end, we have a regression. It's not nothing fancy, but we try to see what are some of the factors that could account for those very low income ranks for the children whose parents are at the bottom of the parental income distribution. So some context, again, this is a slide that could spend, I mean, there's like university courses specifically on that. So this is a very, very, very short context. But in the 2021 census, there were about 1.8 million people reported Indigenous identity in Canada, or about 5% of the total population of the country. It's more than in Australia. So I try to find some comparable countries with the same colonial type of history. It's more than in Australia. It's more people than in New Zealand, but it's less as a share of the population. It's less in number than in the US if we look at American Indian and Alaska Natives, but it's more in terms of a percentage of the population. In Canada, I'm going to use Indigenous to refer to three broad groups: the First Nation, the Métis, and the Inuits. Those groups are recognized by the Canadian governments, though they find that appalling. They only got the right to vote in 1960, so some little tidbits of history that I didn't recognize. I will admit not to know some history, but probably not enough as I feel like I should. But I got to know a little bit more. About half of First Nations are what we call registered or status Indians. This is coming from the Indian Act. Which is almost as old as the country of Canada itself, and has been reviewed, but governs the relationship between the First Nations and the Canadian government. It's very diverse groups, over 70 languages spread around the country, different histories of signing treaties with the government. There's the legacy of residential schools. We could also, there are papers about that. We could spend a lot of time talking about this. There's to mention here, because I'm going to come back to this, some First Nation live on reserves. Reserves are tracts of land that are owned by the Canadian government for use by the First Nations. There's about 3,000, more than 3,000 of them across the country. Most are small and remote, but some are large and quite urban or very, very near big urban areas. About 40% of First Nations live on a reserve. There are quite large gaps in a number of dimensions, whether it's employment, income, poverty, education, contact with the criminal justice system. There's multiple papers, including papers in the CPP, so you can go and read a lot of this. Oops. Okay. Important for our context is the question of tax exemption. So under Section 87 of the Indian Act, income earned on reserve by registered Indians is tax exempt. For that to be exempt, you have to work and live on reserve. It has to be income that is tied to the reserve. However, tax exempt income is not part of the total income variable that is in the IID. So now everything that I've shown you, I'm going to have to go back and think of what this means for what we just saw. I was going to say strangely enough. I don't know if it's strange, but interestingly enough, that information on what is tax exempt and a measure of total income that includes the tax exempt income is included in the LAD, the Longitudinal Administrative Data Bank. So the LAD, the group that works on the LAD, produces not just total income as defined by the Canada Revenue Agency, which is what we have access to in the IID, but also as defined by StatCan. So it includes the tax exempt income. Ideally, this variable would be added to the IID and to the census, by the way, because it's also not in the census, so that we could deepen our understanding of the relationship that we just saw. What it means for us is that the computed income ranks for those that live and work in reserves are probably lower based on our data than what they really are for both parents and children. And this is true of most research done in Canada. So it's not just us, but it is also true. This is the form that one would have to fill to be able to report that income. So that's why it's not in your income data. It's not in your income, but it could be part of your income data, at least after a certain after a certain calendar year. So what it means to go back to that graph is that I probably have some parents that are here at the bottom of income distribution that it's not their all of their income, because part of their income is tax exempt, and so it doesn't enter there. So maybe the size of some of those dots is too large, because those parents should be a little bit further to the right on the x-axis. It also means that probably for some kids, they should be a little bit higher up, because also their income rank is low. I attribute a lower income rank than what it should be. To what extent? I don't think it would. If I had that information, I don't think the whole orange line would go up to the blue line. I think we're far from that. But I think there's a a gray zone here that we're not exactly sure what part of it is due to the tax exemption and what part is not. Okay, now I only have like about a minute left, but you can see some of those descriptive statistics in the paper. We've already seen that the parental income distribution is skewed toward the lower ranks. I will tell you, and I have other graphs that I'm not going to show you, that what we try to look is, do people work? How much people work? So the kids, do they work? And so to look at the extensive margin of work, obviously there's information we don't have annually. We don't know how much they work in terms of hours, but we do see earnings. And so we look at the number of years when we look at their income. So there's 5 years. And so we look at the number of years that they report non-zero earnings. And we can see that Indigenous children are much less likely to report working all those 5 years. So about 25% of them report working all 5 years, so have non-zero earnings, whereas that's more than 50% for non-Indigenous. So there's less work. There's also lower schooling attainments. This is not something that we didn't know before, but it's something that we do. It is reflected in data. They also live more on reserve and work in public administration. I'm going to skip this for the interest of time, but basically the lower schooling attainments. One thing that's interesting here, so by parental income rank, those that have parents in the bottom of the income distribution are more likely to live on reserve, also more likely to work in what's called in an industry that's called Indigenous public administration. I was wondering if that was what kind of jobs those were, what kind of industry, and if that was just because this is an industry where you work few hours during the year, so it's very part-time. And I pulled information from not from our data, but from a basic tables from StatScan, where you have the annual hours, earnings, and wage rate, and I ranked them by wage rates. And what you see is that the lower wage rate industry are accommodation and food services, retail trade, agriculture, and then Indigenous public administration. So it is a very low wage rates work, but it is an actual full-time job. The annual hours are actually a little above the average for all industries. And you can compare that to the federal government's public administration, which is the highest paid, or almost the highest paid, just below mining and oil and gas extraction. Okay, now I'm probably out of time, but in the regression results, just to tell you, what we try to do in the regression results is we try to explain child income rank by parental income rank and different variables. And we can see that the extensive margin of work is, so the number of years that you report non-zero earnings is a strong explainer, quote unquote, here. It's not causal, but in an accounting sense. So the difference in child income rank between Indigenous and non-Indigenous is about 19 ranks. And we can explain about 14, and most of this coming from the whether or not you work. All right, I'm going to go to the conclusion. The conclusion is, if you read the paper, the importance of the IID in contributions to the intergenerational mobility literature, in its continuing relevance. Great research is still being done with this, and the need to keep updating the data because of the great work we can do with this. It's me, but also other people. So I think it'd be great we have now identified, so we've resolved the puzzle, the source of that nonlinearity in rank-rank relationship. But doing so, we uncovered very large differences between the indigenous and non-indigenous. Hopefully, we can keep working in that area, maybe by adding the tax-exempt income variables to the IID, and sort of try to better understand the intergenerational transmission mechanisms to shed light on this phenomenon. I think I'm out of time. So thank you, Tammy, and thank you everybody for being here. I have not seen the chat because now I can't see the window, but if there are questions, I am available.
Thank you, Marie. I think in the interest of time, it is 2 o'clock on my clock, so I think I'm gonna maybe hold any questions. I will highlight in my own interests. I'm very interested in thinking about that geographic mobility being tied to your intergenerational mobility. But it can matter differently for different people, depending on who you are and where you are. So that'd be an interesting thing to pursue. I think at this point, I will turn it over to Tess in case she has anything she wanted to pop in and wrap up for us.
I think that's everything. Thank you to both of our presenters and to you, Tammy, for moderating today. We'll send out an email with the recording after the presentation, and we'll include a link to the upcoming CPP issue. And
Wonderful. Thank you for everyone being here.
thanks.